This is the third video in this section of cellular respiration. In this section, we'll talk about anaerobic and aerobic respiration. We'll also go into a little bit more of the details about cellular respiration and how it works. Some of the video clips you may see off of YouTube, or I may show in class, go into a lot of depth about the specifics of what occurs in the mitochondria. For this section, we will just be focusing on the big ideas. And that's what you will be tested over, even though some of the videos go into a lot of depth. So it's a little difficult sometimes to show some YouTube videos and tutorials because there's so much that's involved in this. But for this section, we're going to focus only on the big ideas about what do we have to know, and not so much of the details that can be very super confusing. First of all, let's talk about the difference between anaerobic and aerobic respiration, and also fermentation. When you think of aerobics, I want you to break down that word of aero. The very first part of it is going to talk about is meaning air. So this is something that is going to be using oxygen. Anaerobic is going to mean without oxygen. This will produce the fermentation in anaerobic respiration. When the mitochondria is doing its job, there are sections that are going to be aerobic and sections that are going to be anaerobic in the cells. In anaerobic, there is not oxygen. It's going to be producing the fermentation. And there's all different cells that make different types of fermentation. And fermentation just really depends upon the different types of cells. When you think about fermentation, a lot of times you think about how the process is to produce wine or beer. And those have to do with those specific types of cells. Our body cells, human body cells, do go through anaerobic respiration, but they do not produce anything that's like going to be the wine or so forth like that. They do produce lactic acid. Cheese and cottage cheese, wine, beer, those are going to be processes that are products because of that type of cell that is placed in an anaerobic condition. When we're looking at cellular respiration, there are 3 stages that we're going to talk about. The first stage is going to be called glycolysis, or glycolysis, or glycolysis is what I typically have said before. The second step is going to be the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle. You will see some videos that say citric acid cycle, or maybe some models or pictures that say citric acid. I will be referencing it as Krebs cycle. The third step is going to be the electron transport chain. And each one of these steps goes into a lot of detail, but do not get bogged down by all of the detail. Stick to the big picture. The first step, glycolysis. At the end of this stage, the cell will continue to move on with this process to make energy, or fermentation will occur. In this case, we start with the model of glucose. And basically what happens is that you have a large molecule of glucose. Remember, it's C6H12O6. That's a pretty big molecule that's entering into this process. So our first thing is to take that and break it down into something that's smaller. So glycolysis is going to break down the glucose. That's going to be stage 1. We see at the beginning of this, we have 6 carbons. The hydrogens and oxygens are going to be left off of this model here. And so the focus is only really on the carbons because they are the main, kind of the key players of it. And again, I said it's a big molecule. So there's a lot of conversions that are occurring in this. There's a lot of steps, and some of them are going to be detailed out in some videos, but don't really focus in on those of the molecular changes of it. But in each one of these, or not each one of them, but a lot of them, they're going to need some energy to have those conversions to take place. So like in the step 1, we have 2 ATPs that are going to be used. Step 3, we have some energy transfers in electron carriers. And in step 4, we also have some more ATP that's going to be used as well, or produced. So in this case, It does not require energy. It is anaerobic. Glycolysis occurs outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. So this is not actually occurring in the mitochondria. It starts outside of it. The glucose is going to be broken down into 2 molecules. This process requires 2 ATP to get it started, and then it is going to produce 4 ATP for a net gain of ATP. Remember, this whole process is about taking glucose and making ATP. That's the end goal, is to have a powerhouse of the cell to produce a lot of energy. This first step of getting glucose started does have something to get it going, but it's not going to produce a lot. And also remember, this does not require oxygen. It is anaerobic. The second step is going to be known as Krebs cycle, and in this case we have the CO2 that is used in this step. It does occur in the mitochondria. There is a small amount of ATP that is produced in this one too. So there's a lot of conversions in this one. If you notice, it starts with citric acid, goes to a 5-carbon, all the way around, a lot of molecular changes that are occurring. And our main focus is that a little bit of ATP is going to be produced in this, but CO2 is going to be expelled or produced in stage 2. So Krebs cycle is going to be the part that produces the CO2 that heterotrophs breathe out. The third step, electron transport chain. This is going to occur in the membrane, all of those folds inside the mitochondria. So when on the first section, I showed you the picture of the mitochondria, you saw that there was all these little folds. Each one of these are going to have a lot of these processes just embedded throughout all of those folds. Those folds are more surface area to produce more energy. This is going to be the key thing that's going to make the most ATPs. The most energy is produced on the third step, which is the electron transport chain. This is a very complicated step. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that are capturing electrons and moving hydrogens, and a lot of pumps, a lot of membrane movement with it as well. So a lot of videos are going to show you a lot of details about ATP synthase. Key thing that I want you to know is that this is the one that's going to make the most ATPs, and there's roughly about 32 to 36 ATPs that are made. Also, water will be produced in this step as well. Key thing about water is that if you ever pay attention to when you are exercising and you're breathing hard and you're expelling all of this carbon dioxide, if you held something up to your hand, like a mirror or something, you can see that water is being breathed out as well. There's a lot to this process. There is a lot of electron transfers, NADH, FADH2, all of these are going to be electrons. We have some hydrogens that are moving across the membrane, and in the end we have some ATP that's going to be produced by this ATP synthase. The ATP synthase is the really cool portion, which you will see a lot of videos that emphasize that. It almost looks like a gear shift in a motor that's going to produce those ATPs. So that's a really cool thing when you watch the videos with it. The big idea about cellular respiration is that we're starting with photosynthesis. Sunlight is going to strike the autotrophs. And the autotrophs, don't forget that plants also have mitochondria. So when I talk about cellular respiration, it's not only the heterotrophs that are involving the cellular respiration portion. The plants are also using it too. Remember that we said that autotrophs make their own food. Well, the food is going to be in the form of glucose. So it's actually going to be producing the food that's going to feed the mitochondria in the plant cells. And not only plants, it can be algae and other autotrophs. So sunlight strikes the chloroplast, going to produce the photosynthesis. That photosynthesis is going to be the C6H12O6 and the oxygen that will enter into the mitochondria. Then cellular respiration will occur, and that will actually feed the chloroplast. So it is going back and forth, and they are working together, those two organelles working together to feed each other. So when we're looking at our this is another model of it. I like this one too because it also shows like the difference between plants and animals. So if you were to have something where maybe you had a rabbit and it didn't have plants to provide the oxygen, then it would die. So it's kind of like sealing it off. But if you had an enclosed environment, they could be feeding each other as well. So let's look at this a little more closely, that we have the autotrophs that are going to be producing the glucose and the oxygen that is going to be the food for the mitochondria. And then the carbon dioxide in water is going to be expelled, and that's going to feed the chloroplasts and then the sunlight as well. The big idea of cellular respiration is that we consume glucose and oxygen to produce energy and give off carbon dioxide. Plants are going to take in that carbon dioxide and then give heterotrophs back the oxygen. And here's a couple video clips that are pretty interesting that kind of summarize it.